that you can see my screen. Thank you. Just joking about this not working. So thank you, everyone. My name is Leah Wasser. I'm the Executive Director of pyOpenSci. I've been in this position for about a month now, but I've been working on and thinking about pyOpenSci for about 4 years. A little bit about me. Ryan already said some of these things. I built the Neon Data Skills program. I built the Earth Analytics Education program. If you ever checked out earthdatascience.org, that's the website that I worked on while I was at Earth Lab. I've been in data intensive science for almost 20 years. And there's a couple things that I really love and am passionate about. One is just building community that also fosters diversity. And the other is tool development and training for open science. So let me just kind of give you the pretext of why I got involved in pyOpenSci and started thinking about pyOpenSci. When I was at Earth Lab and started doing training, and we were building a graduate program and trying to figure out, like, what should we be teaching professionals and students in the earth and environmental science realm? And I switched from R to Python, and I quickly came up to this wall of, like, what packages do I use to process spatial data and big remote sensing data sets? And I quickly realized that there wasn't a straightforward answer to that question. And I went on to PyPy, and there's like hundreds of thousands of packages, and started digging around different packages. And I was like, some of them are well maintained and some of them are less maintained. And sometimes I had to dig into the code to figure out, like, what workflow should I be teaching my students that they can really pick up on and embrace without getting stuck? And is that workflow going to be the same in a month from now because the package might no longer be maintained, or those types of things? So I started realizing there's a real challenge in the scientific Python ecosystem around tool development. And so that's where I started thinking about pyOpenSci, which had addressed some of these challenges in the art ecosystem and is really a huge influence and partner in pyOpenSci's development. So the goals, and I'm going to talk about open peer review first, because there's several components of pyOpenSci, but the idea behind open peer review is that we can minimize redundancy of packages. We can encourage usability through documentation and READMEs and contributing guides and those types of things. We can enforce testing and CI, so that contributor that might want to, contribute something to your software doesn't have to worry about it breaking other things, because there's some tests in place that, ensure that things are going to work with that new contribution. Citability is so important, especially for maintainers, so that they get credit for this incredible work that they're doing. And then creating this diverse community and support for maintainers and people using these scientific Python tools. And then last but not least is this diverse idea of diversifying who's contributing to open source. And that's going to be a really challenging part of this organization, one of many, but super important to make sure that we've got a really diverse community of people that are involved with pyOpenSci. Now, as Ryan mentioned, we are an independent organization. We serve the scientific Python community, and we're fiscally sponsored by community initiatives and funded right now by the Sloan Foundation. So we're really grateful for that support, and we've got about 2 years of support right now. The mission is to build diverse and supportive community around open source software. And we do that through an open peer review process and then training and mentorship. Here's the kind of 2 buckets that you can think about when you think about pyOpenSci. So one is open peer review of open source software. And then the second piece is really this development of a contributor base and training and mentorship in how people can contribute to open source and how scientists can support open source. And that support doesn't have to be writing the code or writing the test. That can be creating tutorial quick starts around how to use a package, or supporting documentation, or just opening an issue in a way that starts a dialogue around maybe a bug or an issue with the package. So that can that can manifest in many different ways. And then at the center of pyOpenSci is, again, this idea of diverse, supportive community. Everything that we do is about collaboration. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel. we're working with JOS, we're working with pyOpenSci. We'd love to work with Pangeo and other communities to make sure that we're working together rather than all kind of doing separate efforts and reinventing the wheel. So let me just tell you a little bit about our open peer review process, because that's really going to be the focus of this showcase talk for today, because I think it's a clear point of collaboration between us and Pangeo. The way this works is that if you're an open source maintainer, you can submit your tool for review on GitHub. We use an open issue system, so everything is visible to the public. And at that point, you're going to work with our editor-in-chief, and there's some basic checks that you need to kind of get through before the review will even start. So those are things like, do you have documentation set up? Do you have a clear scope defined for your package? Is your package generally useful to the community? Is your package set up with testing and CI and those types of things? So those are just the initial steps and checks that we want to make sure exist before you go into the review process. The second step is going to be the actual peer review. And I like to think about peer review as a conversation between reviewers and the maintainers. This isn't a place where we're going to say, this is wrong or this is right. We want there to be back and forth dialogue. We want in the future for the maintainers to get issues and maybe even a little bit of help improving their package through pull requests from the reviewers if we can facilitate that. So we see that as a back and forth dialogue. And then there's some standards that we feed into that peer review process that we're developing. And we want to develop that with the community. We don't want to be the last word on what is right and what is wrong again. We want to, reach out to the community and facilitate either working groups or collaborations with the scientific Python organization to make sure that the standards we're enforcing in our peer review process are the ones that the community accepts and embraces. So at that point, your package is accepted. The point of the review is over, everyone's happy. And at that point, there are two pieces that we can talk about. One, if you're interested in being published with JOS, and JOS is a publishing peer review process. So you get this DOI that has that cross-ref enabled component that you can use for a citation of your package. Now, JOS doesn't accept all of the packages that we do. So in other words, if you're, for example, their scope is different. So for example, if your package is an API wrapper, that would be out of scope for JOS. And so that fast track would not apply to you. But if you're in scope for JOS, they accept our peer review as theirs. And then they just review your paper, and it's a fast tracked process. And so you can be accepted by both pyOpenSci and JOS. Now, the additional layer that we add to peer review is that your package becomes a part of the pyOpenSci ecosystem. And what that means is now you're a vetted tool in the pyOpenSci ecosystem. We're going to see and ensure that your package is maintained over time. And that could look a lot of different ways. We're going to check in annually. And if you're up for maintaining it and continuing to maintain it, that's great. If we can facilitate bringing on a new maintainer, we want to do that. And if the package has just reached end of life and we need to sunset it, then we're going to work on processes that we can sunset it in a way that the community of users that you might have knows that the package might be unmaintained in the future. We also provide community visibility as a vetted tool through social media, through our website, and we will have a catalog of these tools that we keep up to date. And then finally, in the future, we'd like to see our community be able to support maintainers. And I don't have all the answers to how that's going to work. This is only my second month in this position, but it's something that I want to continue conversations with maintainers around in terms of how can our community support you better. Just a little snapshot of what some of our initial checks look like. We have a community guide that I can provide a link to a little bit later if anyone wants to have a look at what those checks are. And all of this is under development, but I just wanted to point out that the barest minimum actually overlaps with some of the language in the Pangeo documentation of solving a general problem, having a clearly defined scope, no duplication. Then we add some other items like, do you have get started vignettes for your users? Do you have really good documentation that will allow people to get started with your package without having to dig into your code base? Those types of things are really a priority in our review process. So you might now be asking, well, what packages would fit into the pyOpenSci ecosystem? And there also is this organization called Scientific Python that's out there doing a lot of incredible work in this community as well. And so we like to think of our organization as supporting the really domain-specific tools. And I don't want to use large or small because Xarray has a huge user base, but some of these domain-specific tools also have fairly considerable user bases as well. So things like NumPy and Matplotlib would not be things that we need to review because they already have established community and support on some level. We're going to really be focused on the packages like RioXarray or Pandera or Tweepy, which is an API wrapper around Twitter data. Those are the types of packages that would be more in scope for us, the maintainers that are kind of doing it on their own, or small little groups of people working on these packages that are being used by the community. So I'm going to wrap up here in the last few minutes with where this all came from in terms of me being here at the Pangeo showcase today. Ryan had posted this issue, gosh, in 2020 about this idea of what would it look like if Pangeo had some sort of vetting process that built upon the pyOpenSci review process, but added an additional layer of standards that were specific to the Pangeo community. And so imagine this could become a model for how pyOpenSci works with different communities like Pangeo, because that's something we're really interested in doing. Again, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. So this is what that could look like, and that's what I'm going to talk about in the last few minutes here. One, our review process stays the same, but we add this additional layer of Pangeo-specific standards. We would develop those with the community in Pangeo, and then once we go through this review process, now our catalog not only showcases pyOpenSci packages, but also Pangeo vetted pyOpenSci packages. So we can curate this list of tools that Pangeo has vetted as a community through our peer review process and facilitate however you would want to display that on your website to really direct your users to the tools that you embrace that are being maintained within the Pangeo community. Now, a few other things that we would provide in this case, if this sounds of interest to the community. We provide the structure and processes for peer review, the catalog of approved maintained packages, and the visibility across the larger scientific ecosystem of your packages. A few other things that we would provide here would be, we're looking beyond the Pangeo community. So we want to support Pangeo, but we also are going to be working with other domains, and we're getting packages from other domains. So we're going to have that visibility across multiple ecosystems that maybe will allow us to reduce some of that duplication of functionality in certain packages, because there might be something else that exists already that does similar things. So we're going to have that cross scientific Python platform lens. And then that common packaging structure, which that's going to be a whole separate discussion, but we'll be able to enforce that idea of having similar approaches to creating Python packages, which is in the long run going to make it easier for multiple people to contribute, because they can learn one or two approaches and then contribute, understanding the infrastructure of the packages, because there's a common theme in how things are packaged. And again, we're not going to do this on our own. We're going to be working with other organizations such as Scientific Python to figure out what the things we want to enforce are, and then we're going to enforce that through our peer review. So on your end, as a Pangeo community member, these are just some ideas. So this is a conversation that I'd love to have with everyone. You know, Pangeo could contribute editors that would support and facilitate the review process. So we have the process in place, but we need your expertise to make sure we're enforcing the right things. We'll also need someone that is a liaison between your organization and ours to facilitate documenting those standards that you'd like to add to our peer review process, and just to keep that conversation going between the two organizations to make sure we're moving in the right direction forward together. And then reviewers, we just always can use reviewers for our peer review process, so that would be really helpful. And just a side note here that Pangeo is written into our Sloan grant if this is of interest. So we have funding and support to do this now if the organization is interested in doing it, the organization being all of you all here today. So with that, I can share the slides here if anyone wants to click on the links, but we're looking for editors now. We're looking for reviewers, or if you're interested in submitting a package to us, our peer review process is open. And then all of my contact information is here as well. And so at this point, I just want to say thank you so much for having me here today and for listening to this talk. And then I'm really open to ideas, discussion, feedback from any of the things that I talked about today, because again, this is month 2 for me. So there's a lot of development going into pyOpenSci now. And I'm really looking forward to the Pangeo community contributing to how we develop and how our processes around how we support all of you. So thank you so much.